I need to tell you something before we go any further. I did not yell when I saw what my son had done. I did not throw a chair. I did not slam him against a wall. I did not lose control in front of everyone. No. I stood there quietly. And sometimes, quiet is the most dangerous thing a father can become. My name is Robert Mercer. I'm 64 years old, and I live in Franklin, Tennessee. I've spent most of my adult life building a business, raising a family, and trying to be the kind of man my wife could depend on. For 32 years, my wife, Linda, stood beside me. Not behind me. Beside me. When I had nothing but an old pickup truck, a rented office, and more ambition than common sense, Linda was there. When the bank said no, she told me to try again. When I came home late, tired, worried, and pretending everything was fine, she always knew better. That woman helped me build everything I have. Our home, our life, our name, and our son. Ethan Mercer, 30 years old, good-looking kid, sharp suit, firm handshake. The kind of young man people look at and think, now there's someone who has it all together. But people don't always see the truth behind a polished smile. They didn't see the credit card in his wallet with my name behind it. They didn't see the monthly help I sent without ever making him ask. They didn't see the phone calls I made, the doors I opened, or the favors I burned so my son could stand in rooms he had not yet earned his way into. I did all of it because I loved him. Maybe that was my mistake. Ethan married into the Whitmore family 2 years ago. His wife, Marissa, was pleasant enough, smart, pretty, careful with her words. But her father, Grant Whitmore, that man was different. Grant was the kind of man who smiled while measuring the value of everything in the room. Your house, your car, your watch, your weakness. The first time I shook his hand, something in my gut told me to watch him. I ignored it. Because when your son says he's in love, you make room at the table. You smile. You welcome people. You try to believe the best, even when your instincts are warning you. Linda never trusted Grant either, though she was kinder about it than I was. She would just say, "That man always sounds like he's selling something." She was right. And because Linda knew people better than anyone I've ever met, she also knew when someone was trying to take advantage of our son. Everyone in our family knew Linda had high blood pressure. Ethan knew it. Marissa knew it. Even the Whitmores knew it. Stress was dangerous for her. That matters. Because on the day everything changed, my wife was lying on our living room floor, pale, shaken, and bleeding from the nose. And my son was in the kitchen, not calling for help, not holding her hand, not checking on the woman who had raised him. He was sitting at my table with his in-laws, discussing property documents. By sunrise the next morning, Ethan would learn something I should have taught him years earlier. A father's love can open doors, but when that love is taken for granted, those doors can close. The week everything changed started like any other business trip. I flew out to Chicago on a Sunday afternoon for a commercial real estate conference. Nothing unusual. I'd been making trips like that for decades. A few meetings, a few handshakes, a few dinners, where men in expensive jackets talked about numbers like they were talking about the weather. Linda packed my bag the night before. She always did that, even though I told her I was perfectly capable of folding my own shirts. She would just smile and say, "Robert, you can build a business empire, but you still pack socks like a teenager." That was Linda. Warm when the world felt cold. Steady when I got too serious. The kind of woman who could make an airport goodbye feel like something worth remembering. The trip was supposed to last 6 days. Everyone knew that. Linda knew. Ethan knew. Even the Whitmores knew, though I still don't know exactly how much Ethan told them or when. By Tuesday morning, I was already tired of Chicago. Don't get me wrong, it's a great city. Big skyline, good restaurants, business everywhere you look. But after 3 decades of travel, hotel rooms all start to feel the same. Same white sheets, same little coffee machine, same sound of doors closing down the hallway at midnight. My final meeting was scheduled for late Tuesday afternoon. Then, just after breakfast, I got a call from one of the partners. Something had come up on their end. The meeting was canceled. Just like that, my schedule opened. I could have stayed another night. I could have ordered room service, watched cable news, and pretended I enjoyed the quiet. But all I could think about was Linda. I pictured her in the kitchen, probably humming to herself, probably pretending not to miss me, even though she always did. And I thought, why not surprise her? So I changed my flight. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't send one of those little heart emojis she liked so much. I wanted to see her face when I walked through the door early. That was all. A simple husband's surprise. I landed at Nashville International Airport a little after 1 in the afternoon. The Tennessee air felt warmer than Chicago's, softer somehow. I picked up my bag, got my car from long-term parking, and started the drive back to Franklin. For the first time all week, I felt light. I remember that clearly. I was thinking about stopping for flowers. Then I thought Linda would tease me for buying overpriced airport flowers, so I decided I'd take her to dinner instead. Somewhere quiet, somewhere with good bread and no phones on the table. The drive home was peaceful, too peaceful, now that I think about it. By the time I turned into our neighborhood, the streets were calm, lawns trimmed, flags moving gently on front porches. The kind of afternoon where nothing bad is supposed to happen. Then I saw it. A black Cadillac parked in my driveway. Grant Whitmore's Cadillac. I knew that car the second I saw it. Polished so clean it looked like he had paid someone to wipe the dust off between stoplights. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Grant was Ethan's father-in-law. Rich, smooth, arrogant in that quiet way some men are when they've spent too many years getting what they want. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe they had stopped by for lunch. Maybe Marissa was there. Maybe Linda had invited them over and forgot to mention it. People visit. Families do that. Still, something in my gut shifted. The same feeling I had the first time I shook Grant Whitmore's hand. That small, quiet warning. Watch this man. I parked behind his Cadillac, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment. The house looked normal. Front porch clean. Curtains still. Afternoon sun across the windows. Nothing about it warned me that my life was about to split into before and after. I grabbed my bag, walked up the front steps, and reached for the door. I thought I was coming home to surprise my wife. I had no idea I was about to find out what kind of man my son had become. I reached for the front door thinking I was about to surprise my wife. That was the last normal thought I had that day. The door wasn't locked. Now, that might not sound strange to some people, but Linda always locked the door when she was home alone. Always. She had a routine about everything. Front door locked. Back door checked. Porch light on if I was coming home late. So when the handle turned without a key, I paused. Just for a second. Then I pushed the door open. The first thing I heard was laughter. Not from the living room. Not from the front hallway. From the kitchen. It rolled through the back of the house like nothing was wrong. Easy laughter. Comfortable laughter. The kind of laughter people share when they have full plates in front of them and no reason to feel ashamed. I heard glasses clink. I heard a chair scrape against the floor. I heard Grant Whitmore's voice, smooth and confident, like he owned the room. And then I heard my son. Ethan laughed. That sound stayed with me longer than I wish it had. I stepped inside and set my bag down near the entryway. I was about to call out Linda's name when something stopped me. The living room was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Wrong quiet. The television was off. The curtains were half open. Afternoon light came through the windows and stretched across the hardwood floor. Everything looked exactly the way it always did, except for my wife. Linda was on the floor near the couch. For a moment, my mind refused to understand what I was seeing. She wasn't sitting. She wasn't resting. She wasn't looking for something she had dropped. She was on the floor, leaning against the base of the sofa, one hand pressed beneath her nose. Her face was pale in a way I had never seen before. Her cream-colored blouse had a dark stain near the collar. Blood. My heart dropped. Linda? Her eyes moved toward me. And I swear, in all the years I had known that woman, I had never seen her look at me like that. Not scared exactly. Worn out. Like she had been holding herself together with every ounce of strength she had left. And the second she saw me, she finally believed she didn't have to hold on alone anymore. I crossed the room so fast I don't remember taking the steps. I dropped to one knee beside her and touched her shoulder gently. Baby, look at me. I'm here. Her hand was trembling. I pulled out my phone and called 911. My voice stayed calm because it had to. When the dispatcher answered, I gave our address, told her my wife was conscious but weak, and explained that she had blood beneath her nose and a history of high blood pressure. The dispatcher told me to keep Linda upright and calm. So I did. I sat there on the living room floor, one hand holding my wife's hand, the other holding the phone, and from the kitchen, they were still laughing. That is the part I will never forget. Not the blood, not the fear, not even the way Linda looked at me. It was the sound of people laughing 11 feet away while my wife sat on the floor needing help. My son was in that kitchen. My grown son. The boy Linda had raised, fed, protected, and prayed over. And somehow, while his mother was sitting alone in the living room, pale and shaking, he stayed at that table. I looked toward the kitchen once, just once, and something inside me changed. I didn't yell. I didn't move toward them. Not yet. I stayed with Linda. I wiped her face carefully with a napkin from the coffee table. I told her to breathe slowly. I told her help was coming. But inside me, the fear was turning into something colder, something quieter, something that would not go away. Because in that moment, I understood one thing very clearly. Whatever was happening in my kitchen was not more important than my wife. And by the time those sirens reached our street, I already knew there would be consequences. The sirens reached our street before I even realized I had been holding my breath. They weren't loud at first, just a faint sound in the distance, then closer, then sharp enough to cut through the walls of my own home. I stayed on the floor beside Linda, one hand holding hers, the other still gripping my phone. The dispatcher kept talking to me, calm and steady, telling me to keep Linda upright, keep her breathing slow, keep her from moving too much. So that's what I did. "Stay with me, sweetheart," I said softly. "Help is here. You're not alone." Linda tried to answer, but her voice was weak, too weak. That scared me more than I wanted to admit. My wife was not a fragile woman. Linda Mercer had stood beside me through failed deals, hospital visits, funerals, long nights, and harder mornings. I had seen her tired. I had seen her upset. But I had never seen her look so drained. The front door opened, and 2 paramedics came in fast. Professional, focused, calm. The first one was a younger man with a name tag that read Caleb Brooks. He knelt beside Linda while his partner set down the medical bag. Caleb spoke to her gently, asking her name, asking if she knew where she was, asking how long she had been feeling lightheaded. Linda answered as best she could. Then he wrapped the blood pressure cuff around her arm. I watched his face. That's something you learn after enough years in business and life. People can say whatever they want, but their face usually tells you the truth first. And Caleb's face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved from the monitor to Linda, then to me. "Mr. Mercer," he said carefully, "your wife's blood pressure is extremely high. She's in a hypertensive crisis." The words landed hard. I knew Linda had high blood pressure. We all did. She took medication. She watched her salt. She kept doctor's appointments. She did what she was supposed to do. But Caleb's tone told me this was different. "This kind of thing usually builds," he continued. "Stress can push it much higher." She needed attention before it got to this point. Before it got to this point, I looked toward the kitchen. For the first time since I walked through that door, the laughter stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. I could feel them listening now. Ethan, Grant, Caroline. Now they were quiet. Now that strangers in uniforms were standing in my living room. Now that there were medical supplies on my floor. Now that my wife was being prepared for a stretcher. Not before. I swallowed the anger because Linda needed me steady. Caleb and his partner worked quickly. They gave her oxygen, checked her pulse again, and told me they were taking her to a hospital in Nashville for observation. They didn't want to take chances. Neither did I. As they lifted Linda onto the stretcher, she reached for my hand. I took it. Her fingers were cold. She squeezed once. I squeezed back twice. That was our little thing. It had been for years. 1 squeeze meant, "I'm here." 2 meant, "I'm not going anywhere." I walked beside her until they rolled her out the front door. Grant's Cadillac was still sitting in my driveway like it belonged there. I watched them load my wife into the ambulance. The doors closed. The siren started again, and then she was gone. For a few seconds, I stood on the porch without moving. The afternoon sun was still shining. The lawns were still neat. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked like it was just another Tuesday. But inside me, something had gone very still. Not hot, not wild, still. I turned around and walked back into the house. I did not yell. I did not run. I did not say a word. I just moved slowly toward the kitchen, because it was time to find out why my wife had been alone on that floor. I have walked into a lot of difficult rooms in my life. Boardrooms where millions of dollars were on the line. Hospital rooms where the air felt too heavy to breathe. Funeral homes where there was nothing left to say except goodbye. But nothing ever felt like walking into my own kitchen that afternoon. The closer I got, the quieter the house became. A few minutes earlier, that room had been full of laughter. Easy laughter, careless laughter. The kind that comes from people who believe they are safe from consequences. Now there was nothing, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my shoes against the floor. When I stepped into the doorway, I saw them. Ethan was sitting at the table, my son. 30 years old, broad shoulders, expensive watch, the kind of posture men use when they want to look more certain than they feel. To his left sat Grant Whitmore. Grant had one hand resting beside a stack of papers, like he had been in the middle of closing a deal. His glass of iced tea was still half full. His napkin was folded neatly beside his plate. Even in my house, after my wife had just been taken away by ambulance, the man still looked like he was trying to control the room. Caroline Whitmore sat across from him, her purse on the back of her chair, her face tight and pale. She knew before either of the men did that something had shifted. On the table were plates of food, 2 pens, and a folder full of legal documents. That folder told me everything I needed to know. This had not been a visit. This had been a setup. Ethan stood the moment he saw me. "Dad," I raised one finger. Just one, and he stopped. I didn't trust myself to look at him yet, not fully. Not after seeing his mother on that floor. Not after hearing his laugh from the kitchen while I was holding her hand and calling 911. So I looked at Grant first. He met my eyes with that polished expression of his. Calm, careful, practiced. The kind of look a man gives when he still believes words can save him. I kept my voice low. "Get out of my house." Grant blinked once. Caroline looked down at the table. Ethan shifted beside his chair, but he didn't speak. Grant leaned back slightly, as if he wanted to remind me that he was not the kind of man people ordered around. "Robert," he said, smooth as ever, "I think emotions are running high right now. Maybe we should all sit down and talk like adults." I almost smiled. Not because anything was funny. Because even then, even with medical towels in my living room and my wife on her way to the hospital, Grant still thought this was a negotiation. "It isn't, Robert," I said. "Not to you." His face tightened. I stepped 1 foot farther into the kitchen. "This is my home. My wife was just carried out of it. And you are sitting at my table with paperwork you had no business bringing here." Nobody moved, so I said it again, slower. "Get out of my house." Caroline stood first. Smart woman. She grabbed her purse with shaking hands and touched Grant's arm. It wasn't affection. It was warning. The kind a wife gives her husband when she knows the room has turned against him and pride is about to make things worse. Grant looked at her, then back at me. For a second, I thought he might try one more speech. He didn't. He stood, slow and stiff, trying to make it look like leaving was his decision. Men like Grant always need one last piece of dignity to carry out the door. I let him have it. Not because he deserved it, because I had bigger things to deal with. As Caroline pulled him toward the hallway, Ethan finally found his voice. "Dad, please, just let me explain." I turned my head toward him for the first time, and when I did, whatever words he had left disappeared. "Not yet," I said. My voice was quiet, but my son heard what was underneath it. The conversation was coming, and when it did, there would be nowhere left for him to hide. Grant Whitmore did not like being told to leave. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. Men like Grant are used to walking into rooms and having people adjust themselves around him. They lower their voices. They choose their words carefully. They make space. But this was my house. And that afternoon, I was done making space for him. He pushed his chair back slowly, letting the legs scrape against my kitchen floor, just enough to make a point. Caroline was already on her feet, purse clutched in one hand, the other resting lightly on Grant's arm, not lovingly, warningly. She knew what he didn't want to admit yet. There was nothing left to win in that kitchen. Grant straightened his jacket, as if dignity could be buttoned back into place. He gave me one last look, the kind of look a man gives when he wants you to know he is leaving by choice. I let him believe that. For the moment, Caroline moved first. She passed Ethan without looking at him. Grant followed behind her, slower, heavier, still trying to carry the room with him even as he was being forced out of it. I stepped aside and let them pass. I said nothing. Sometimes words are too small for what a person deserves to feel. They walked down the hallway toward the front door. Then Caroline stopped. At first, I thought she had changed her mind and was going to say something. Maybe an apology, maybe an excuse. Maybe one of those soft, useless sentences people offer when they want forgiveness without accountability. But then I saw where she was looking. The living room. Her face changed. All the color left it. Grant took one more step, then stopped beside her. And for the first time since I had known that man, he had nothing polished to say. The floor still showed where Linda had been. There were medical towels near the couch, a small wrapper from the oxygen equipment, a faint mark on the hardwood from the stretcher wheels. And there, near the base of the sofa, was the stain I had not had the strength to clean yet. My wife's blood. Caroline lifted a hand to her mouth. Grant stared at the floor like he was seeing the truth for the first time. Not the business version, not the legal version, not whatever story he had told himself when he walked into my home with paperwork and a plan. The real version. My wife had been alone. She had been scared. She had needed help. And while she sat there fighting to stay steady, they had remained in my kitchen, talking about assets, signatures, and control. I watched Grant's shoulders drop just a little. It was small, but I saw it. That was the moment he understood his clean little plan had turned into something much uglier than he expected. Good. I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to carry that image with him when he got into that shiny black Cadillac. I wanted him to remember that the woman he had talked over, dismissed, and pushed past was not just some obstacle between him and a building. She was my wife. She was Ethan's mother. She was the woman who had helped build every single thing he had tried to reach for. Caroline whispered, "Grant." He didn't answer. He just looked away. That told me more than any apology could have, because men like Grant hate being wrong, but they hate being exposed even more. I walked to the front door and opened it. Neither of them looked at me as they stepped outside. Grant's expensive shoes crossed my porch. Caroline followed close behind him, her hand still trembling around the strap of her purse. The afternoon sun hit them like nothing had happened. But something had, and all three of us knew it. Grant reached his Cadillac, opened the door, and paused for half a second before getting in. Maybe he wanted to turn back. Maybe he wanted to say something. Maybe he finally understood that he had not just crossed a line. He had stepped into a life he had no right to touch, but he said nothing. Caroline got in beside him. The engine started. The car backed out of my driveway and rolled down the street, slow and quiet. I stood in the doorway until it disappeared. Then I closed the door. Not hard, not dramatically, just closed it. And when the latch clicked, the house became painfully silent. Behind me, Ethan was still in the kitchen, waiting, breathing, probably hoping I would start yelling, because yelling would have been easier for him to understand. But I was not ready to yell. I was ready to listen. And then, I was going to make him tell me everything. When the front door clicked shut behind Grant and Caroline Whitmore, the whole house seemed to exhale. But it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that settles after something breaks. I stood there for a moment, facing the door, listening to the low rumble of Grant's Cadillac as it pulled away from my driveway. A few seconds later, the sound faded down the street. Then there was nothing. No laughter, no voices, no ambulance. Just my house. And my son. I turned around slowly. Ethan was still in the kitchen. He hadn't moved from the table, not really. He was standing now, but barely. His hands were at his sides, his shoulders stiff, his face caught somewhere between guilt and fear. For the first time that afternoon, he looked 30 and 12 at the same time. That's the strange thing about being a father. Your child can be grown. He can have a wife, a job, a watch more expensive than your first car, and still, when you look at him, you remember the little boy who used to run through your hallway in socks. But that little boy was not the man standing in my kitchen. Not anymore. I walked back to the table and pulled out a chair. Slowly, I sat down across from him. The food was still there. Half-eaten sandwiches, a bowl of fruit, glasses of iced tea sweating onto the wood, and right in the middle of it all sat that folder. Legal papers. In my home. On my table. While my wife had been alone on the floor. I looked at the folder first. Then I looked at Ethan. "Sit down," I said. He swallowed hard. "Dad, I can explain." I said sit down. This time he listened. The chair creaked under him as he sat. He kept his eyes low, like a man hoping the floor might open up and give him somewhere else to be. I folded my hands on the table. "Start talking," I said, "and do not leave anything out." For a few seconds he didn't speak. Then his shoulders dropped, and the truth started coming out. Grant and Caroline had not just stopped by for lunch. They had planned this visit more than 2 weeks earlier. They knew I would be in Chicago. They knew Linda would be home. They knew I would not be there to push back, ask questions, or shut the whole thing down before it started. That alone told me plenty. Ethan said Grant had been talking to him for months about stepping into his future. That was the phrase he used. Stepping into his future. As if my son's future was something Grant had a right to design. Then Ethan pointed to the folder. Inside were documents connected to my commercial building on Riverside Drive in Nashville. A 3-story building. 2 law offices on the 2nd floor. A medical billing company on the 3rd. A small cafe on the ground level that Linda loved because the owner used to send her fresh muffins every Christmas. That building was not just an asset. It was 19 years of risk, debt, repairs, late nights, and decisions I had made with Linda beside me. I had told Ethan once that someday, when the time was right, it might be his. Someday. Not today, not behind my back, not through paperwork brought into my kitchen by a man who had never laid one brick, paid one loan, or lost one night of sleep over it. Grant wanted Ethan to sign papers that would begin moving control of the property into a new company. A company Grant had helped create. Of course he had. I let Ethan keep talking. He said Grant told him a grown man should not have to wait for his father's permission. That real men take opportunities when they appear. That if Ethan wanted to be respected, he needed to stop standing in my shadow. And my son listened. I looked at him for a long time. Not angry yet. Worse. Disappointed. Ethan, I said quietly, did you understand what you were signing? His mouth opened, then closed. That was my answer. And in that moment, the papers on the table stopped being the most painful thing in the room. Because I finally understood. Grant had not forced his way into my family. My son had opened the door. Ethan looked at me across that kitchen table, and for a few seconds, he could barely get the words out. I didn't rush him. I wanted the truth. All of it. Not the cleaned-up version. Not the version Grant Whitmore would have told. Not the version Ethan had probably been repeating in his own head to make himself feel less guilty. The truth. He rubbed both hands over his face and said, "Mom heard us." That was where everything changed. Ethan told me Linda had been in the hallway at first. She wasn't trying to spy. She had walked toward the kitchen because she heard Grant's voice getting louder. Then she heard my name. Then she heard the words Riverside Drive. And Linda knew. My wife knew that building better than anyone. She knew the years we spent paying it off. She knew the repairs that nearly buried us. She knew the nights I came home worried, and she sat beside me at the kitchen table, helping me figure out how to keep everything standing. So when she heard Grant talking about paperwork, ownership, and timing, she stepped into that kitchen. Ethan said she didn't scream at first. She just looked at the folder, then at Grant, and said, "What exactly are you asking my son to sign?" Grant tried to smile his way around it. Linda didn't let him. She picked up one of the pages, read enough to understand what was happening, and put it back on the table. Then she said, "This property belongs to Robert. Ethan has no authority to transfer anything. That should have ended it. In my house, with my wife standing there, that should have ended every word of that conversation." But Grant Whitmore was not used to being corrected, especially not by a woman he thought he could dismiss. Ethan said Grant leaned back, gave that smooth little laugh of his, and told Linda she was making this more emotional than it needed to be. I could picture her face when he said that. Linda Mercer had patience for many things. Disrespect was not one of them. She told Grant he had no right to come into our home while I was away and pressure our son into signing documents he did not fully understand. Grant talked over her. Linda raised her voice. And then Ethan said something that made my hands tighten on the table. She said her head hurt. I stared at him. He looked down. She said her head hurt. He whispered. She said her head hurt. He whispered. She said her head hurt. She said she needed to sit down for a minute. I waited. Because I already knew what came next. Ethan said he started to stand up. For one brief second, my son almost did the right thing. But Grant slid the folder back in front of him and said, "Finish this before your father gets home. A grown man doesn't run every time his mother gets upset." And Ethan sat back down. He told himself Linda was only stepping away to calm down. He told himself she had done that before during arguments. He told himself he would check on her in a minute. A minute became 5, 5 became 10, and my wife stayed alone in the living room. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the man I had raised. You knew about her blood pressure, I said. He nodded, barely. You knew stress could make it worse. Another nod. And you still stayed at this table. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That silence was the answer. For the first time in my life, I looked at my son and did not see a boy who needed guidance. I saw a man who had made a choice. A weak choice. A selfish choice. A choice that left his mother alone when she needed him most. And that was the moment something inside me stopped defending him. By the time I reached the hospital, the anger had settled into something quieter. That worried me more. Anger moves fast. It makes noise. It burns hot and then burns out. But what I felt sitting beside Linda's hospital bed was different. It was still. The kind of stillness that comes when a man stops asking himself what he feels and starts deciding what he is going to do. Linda was lying under thin white blankets, the monitor beside her blinking softly in the dim room. The doctors had her blood pressure coming down, but they wanted to keep her overnight. They said it was the safest choice. I agreed before they finished the sentence. There are moments in life when you realize how close you came to losing everything. That night was one of them. I sat beside my wife and held her hand under those cold hospital lights. Her eyes were closed, but every now and then, her fingers would move against mine, like she was making sure I was still there. I was. I wasn't going anywhere. I looked at her face and saw 32 years. I saw the young woman who believed in me when believing in me was not a smart investment. I saw her sitting in our first tiny office, sorting invoices on a folding table because we couldn't afford real furniture yet. I saw the nights she stayed awake with me when a loan payment was due and the rent checks had not cleared. I saw her packing lunches when money was tight, smiling like we were just being practical, not scared. Linda helped me build every piece of my life. And that afternoon, while I was hundreds of miles away, she had stood up for it. She had stood up for me. Against Grant Whitmore. Against those papers. Against the pressure being put on our son. And Ethan? I closed my eyes for a moment. That was the part I still could not understand. My son knew his mother's condition. He knew stress was dangerous for her. He knew she should not have been left alone after saying she felt dizzy. And still, he stayed at that table. When Linda finally drifted into a deeper sleep, I eased my hand from hers and stepped out into the hallway. The hospital was quiet in that strange way hospitals are at night. Nurses moved softly past open doors. Machines beeped behind curtains. Somewhere down the hall, a family was whispering prayers. I stood near the window, took out my phone, and made the first call. The credit card was easy. Ethan had been an authorized user on my account for years. I never questioned it. Gas, groceries, dinners, travel, little things that added up but never bothered me, because he was my son. That ended that night. The woman on the phone was polite, professional, efficient. Less than 5 minutes later, Ethan's access was gone. I thanked her and hung up. Then I made a note to call the insurance company first thing in the morning. His car was still on my family policy. Not anymore. After that, I emailed his apartment leasing office. I made it clear that I would not guarantee any future renewal, extension, or new lease on Ethan's behalf. Then I logged into my bank account. For years, I had sent Ethan money every month. At first, it was to help him get on his feet after college. Then it became habit. Then it became something he expected without ever saying thank you. I canceled the transfer. Permanently. I stared at the screen for a long moment after I did it. Because that money was not just money. It was a cushion. A safety net. A quiet promise that no matter how careless he became, Dad would always catch him. Not anymore. Before sunrise, I made a few more calls. Men I had known for 20 years. Business contacts. Friends. People who had opened doors for Ethan because my name was attached to his. I kept it simple. Ethan no longer operates with my backing. No drama, no explanation, no revenge speech. Just the truth. By the time the sun started to rise over Nashville, my son had not lost my love. But he had lost my protection. And there is a difference. A painful one. But sometimes, it is the only way a man learns what his choices really cost. The next morning, the sun came up like nothing had happened. That always feels strange after a night that changes your life. The world keeps moving. Cars still pass outside, coffee still brews, people still walk their dogs and check their mail. But inside you, nothing is the same. Linda was stable by morning, but the doctors wanted to keep watching her blood pressure a little longer. I thanked every nurse who walked into that room. I thanked the doctor twice. Then I leaned down, kissed my wife on the forehead, and told her I would be back soon. She looked tired, but she was alive, and that was enough to let me breathe again. Before I left the hospital, I called my attorney. I told him I wanted the Riverside Drive building protected immediately. Not next month. Not when he had time. Now. That building was not just brick, glass, and rental income. It was Linda sitting beside me at midnight, helping me decide which bill could wait. It was years of risk, years of work, years of sacrifice. And no man named Grant Whitmore was ever going to reach into my life and take what my wife helped build. By 8:30 that morning, I had a locksmith at the house. He changed the front door, the back door, the garage entry. Every lock Ethan had a key to. I stood in the hallway while he worked, listening to the small metal clicks echo through the house. Each click felt final, not angry, final. Around 9 o'clock, Ethan showed up. I watched from the upstairs window as his car pulled into the driveway. He got out slowly, looking like he had not slept. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be. The boy who would run to that same front door after school, waving a paper with a good grade on it, waiting for his mother to clap. That memory hurt. Then he reached into his pocket and took out his key. He tried the lock. It did not turn. He tried again. Still nothing. He stepped back and looked at the door as if the house itself had betrayed him. No, son. The house had not betrayed you. Choices have a way of changing what you are allowed to enter. A few minutes later, my phone rang from the neighbor's number. Ethan's battery was nearly dead, and his card had already been declined that morning. For the first time in his adult life, there was no easy backup waiting behind him. I answered. Neither of us spoke at first. Then he said, "Dad, how long is this going to last?" I closed my eyes. Because I loved him. God help me, I still loved him. But love is not the same as access. Love is not the same as money. Love is not the same as letting a grown man avoid the weight of what he has done. So I told him the truth. I don't know, Ethan. That depends on how long it takes you to become the kind of man who never leaves his mother alone on the floor. He started to say something, but his voice broke. I let the silence sit between us. Then I said, I am not closing this door because I hate you. I am closing it because I love you enough to stop protecting you from yourself. And that was the hardest sentence I had ever spoken to my son. Maybe one day he will understand it. Maybe one day he will look back and realize that the moment his father stepped away was the moment he finally had to stand on his own. I hope he does. I truly do. But that morning, my place was not on the porch explaining consequences to a grown man. My place was beside Linda. So I hung up the phone, picked up my keys, and drove back to the hospital. When I walked into her room, she was awake. She gave me a tired smile and reached for my hand. I took it. 1 squeeze from her, 2 from me. Our little promise. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And if there is anything I want you to take from this, it is this. Family love should be generous, but it should never be blind. Helping someone is beautiful, but protecting them from every consequence can turn love into a cage, for you and for them. Sometimes the hardest door to close is the one you kept open out of love, and sometimes closing it is the only way to teach someone what love was worth in the first place.